"You kissed me while I was out?" the rancher blurted. She smirked. "I saved your life, cowboy." Colton Hayes wiped the sweat from his brow as the scorching sun beat down on the dry plains of New Texas. The air was thick with the scent of dust, and the ground beneath his boots seemed to crackle with every step he took. He had just finished rounding up a herd of cattle that had strayed too far from the ranch, and now, with the sun dipping low in the sky, he was ready to head back to his modest ranch house. His day had been long, but the job always had to be done. His ranch sat at the edge of the wild frontier, far from the bustling cities on New Texas. Out here, it was just him, the cattle, and the unforgiving landscape. Colton had grown up on this land, and he'd worked it with his father before him. Life was simple, but it wasn't easy. Everything out here, from the weather to the wildlife, seemed determined to make survival a daily challenge. But Colton wasn't the type to back down. He'd survived worse. As he guided his horse through the tall, dry grass, his thoughts turned to the recent rumors swirling around New Texas. There had been talk of a group of ruthless bandits led by a man known only as Commander Talon. They'd been raiding ranches and taking what they wanted, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Colton had heard stories of their cruelty, and the last thing he wanted was for them to set their sights on his family's land. He was miles away from the nearest town, and his ranch was far from any other settlements. If the bandits decided to come after him, there would be no one around to help. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. As he reached the edge of his property, a chill ran down his spine. Something didn't feel right. Colton looked around, scanning the horizon, but all he could see were the endless fields and distant hills. His instincts, honed by years of working the land, told him to be cautious. Just then, a sound broke the stillness.
A twig snapped in the distance. Colton froze.
His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his side. Slowly, he reached down to grab the reins of his horse, ready to make a quick getaway if needed. But before he could move, a group of figures appeared from behind a nearby hill, their silhouettes framed against the setting sun. At first, Colton thought they were travelers, maybe traders passing through. But as they drew closer, he recognized the glint of weapons in their hands. These weren't peaceful wanderers. They were bandits. A dozen or more men, all armed, surrounded him in an instant. Colton's heart raced as he reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, one of the bandits shouted, "Drop it, cowboy! You're outnumbered." Colton hesitated for a moment, sizing up his attackers. There were too many for him to take on alone, and there was no way he could outrun them on horseback. He gritted his teeth, knowing that his only chance was to try to talk his way out of it. "Listen," Colton said, his voice steady despite the danger. "I don't want any trouble." "You can take whatever you need, but I won't make it easy for you." The leader of the bandits, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. He looked Colton up and down with a sneer. "You don't get to make the rules here. Hand over your weapons." Reluctantly, Colton dropped his revolver to the ground. He wasn't going to give up without a fight, but he knew the odds were against him. "That's better," the bandit leader said, smirking. "Now, take a step back. We're going to be taking your cattle, and you're going to keep quiet while we do." Colton's mind raced. His cattle were his livelihood, and without them, he'd have nothing. He couldn't let these men take everything he worked for. Just as he opened his mouth to protest, a gunshot rang out. The bandits turned in surprise, and Colton seized the opportunity. He dove for his revolver, but before he could reach it, the world around him began to spin. A sharp pain shot through his side, and his vision blurred. The ground rushed up to meet him, and everything went black. When Colton regained consciousness, he was no longer lying in the dirt. The pain in his side had dulled, and his surroundings were unfamiliar. He could feel something cool and damp on his forehead, and as his eyes fluttered open, he saw a pair of steady, amber-colored eyes staring down at him. "Easy there, cowboy," a woman's voice said, calm and composed. Colton blinked, trying to focus. The woman in front of him was young, with short black hair and an air of confidence about her. Her clothes were practical, sturdy boots, a fitted jacket, and a utility belt loaded with weapons. She didn't look like someone from around here. Who are you?" Colton croaked, his voice raspy from unconsciousness. "My name's Kara," she said, offering him a reassuring smile. "You were in pretty bad shape. I had to do what I could to keep you alive." Colton's hand instinctively went to his side, where the pain had been. But to his surprise, the wound was already treated, wrapped in a makeshift bandage. He had no idea how long he had been out, but it was clear that this woman had taken care of him. You saved me?" he asked, still trying to process everything. She smirked, clearly amused by his confusion. "Yeah, you were bleeding out there. You wouldn't have made it through the night without my help. You should be thanking me." Colton's mind was still foggy, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "How did you find me?" Kara's expression hardened slightly, and for a moment she looked far older than her years. "I'm tracking the same people you are. They're the ones who did this to you. I was on their trail, and I couldn't let you die out here." Colton frowned. He had heard the rumors of bandits working for the warlords, but he hadn't expected to get caught in the middle of it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Kara looked him in the eye, and for a moment Colton thought he saw something like sympathy in her gaze. "I'm not asking for anything, but if you want to live, you'll help me take down these bastards." Colton stared at her, trying to make sense of it all. His ranch was at risk, and he was barely able to stay on his feet. But there was something in Kara's eyes, something that told him she wasn't just a mercenary. And so, despite his reservations, Colton nodded. "All right, I'm in, but I need to know one thing." Kara raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" Colton gave her a half grin. "You kissed me while I was out." "What was that about?" She smirked again, her eyes glinting with humor. "I saved your life, cowboy." The following days were a blur for Colton. Kara had taken charge, guiding him through the recovery process as they made their way back to his ranch. She seemed to know exactly what to do, where to find herbs, how to patch up a wound, and when to push him to keep moving. Colton, still feeling weak and a bit confused, followed her lead. It was clear she was no ordinary traveler. The storm that had been brewing for days finally hit as they crossed the last stretch of open land, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of them. The wind howled, and the rain lashed at their faces. Colton had lived through plenty of storms, but this one felt different, almost as if it were a warning. "You're going to have to hang on tight, cowboy," Kara shouted over the roar of the wind, her voice steady despite the fierce weather. "We need to get to shelter fast." Colton, too exhausted to argue, nodded and gripped the reins tightly as they pushed forward, the mud beneath their horses' hooves thick and sticky. He didn't know much about Kara, but he could tell she wasn't afraid of the storm, or anything else for that matter. It took nearly 3 hours of battling the wind and rain, but they finally made it to Colton's ranch. The wind still howled as they rode into the yard, but at least they were safe, for now. Colton felt a mix of relief and uncertainty wash over him. His ranch was his pride and joy, the only home he had ever known. But now, with Kara by his side, things were changing, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for what that meant. Once inside the house, Kara immediately began setting up a fire. Colton, still weak from his injuries, slumped into a chair near the hearth. His thoughts kept drifting back to the bandits, Commander Talon and his men. Colton had heard stories about them for weeks, but now they felt real, like a shadow lurking just out of sight. "Why did you come here?" Colton asked, breaking the silence. "Why New Texas? What's your stake in all this?" Kara didn't look up from the fire she was tending. She just poked the wood with a stick and watched the flames crackle. "I've been hunting them for years," she said simply. "Talon's men burned my colony to the ground, took everything from me." Colton leaned forward, trying to understand. "Your colony? Where was it?" Kara turned to look at him, her face unreadable. "It was on the far side of the galaxy. We had nothing, but we had each other. And now they're dead, and I'm the last one left." Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge of pain in it that Colton could feel even from across the room. Colton didn't know what to say. He wasn't good with words, especially when someone was hurting. He'd lost family too, but it had been a long time ago. Now he was alone, with no one but his land. But Kara's pain was different. He could tell she wasn't just seeking revenge. She was trying to reclaim something that had been taken from her. "I'm sorry," he said after a moment. "I didn't know." Kara gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "You don't have to apologize. You didn't do it." The fire crackled in the silence between them. Colton shifted in his seat, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. He was used to being on his own. But now, with Kara here, everything felt different. She was an outsider, and yet she had become his ally in a way he hadn't expected. "Do you think they'll come here?" Colton asked, the question that had been gnawing at him since the moment he realized the bandits were after him. Kara's eyes hardened. "They won't stop until they've taken everything. That's how Talon works." Colton felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had been taught to defend his land, to protect what was his. But this wasn't just a matter of cattle and fences anymore. This was about survival. His, Kara's, and maybe even the future of the entire planet. "We need to find a way to fight back," Colton said, his voice firm. I won't just sit here and wait for them to take it all. Kara looked at him, her gaze piercing. You're going to need more than a rifle and a couple of ranch hands, cowboy. Talon has a whole army behind him and... I know, Colton said, but I've got something he doesn't. People who care about this land. I'm not alone in this fight. For the first time since he had met her, Kara's expression softened. She nodded slowly, as if weighing his words. All right, but you'll need to be ready. This isn't just a fight for your land. It's a fight for survival. Colton stood up, feeling the fire's warmth spread through his bones. I'm ready. The next few days were spent preparing. Colton and Kara worked together to fortify the ranch, boarding up windows, reinforcing doors, and setting traps around the perimeter. Kara taught Colton how to set up basic defensive strategies, showing him where the bandits might attack and how to use the terrain to their advantage. Colton had always been good with animals and land, but fighting, that was a new skill. He learned quickly, though, and soon he was helping Kara set up defenses around the property, making sure everything was in place in case the bandits tried to make their move. Kara's quiet confidence was infectious, and Colton found himself feeling more determined than ever. His ranch had always been more than just a job, it was his home, and now it was something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. But even as they worked, Colton couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He'd catch glimpses of movement in the distance, shadows flickering on the horizon. The bandits were close. Too close. Kara noticed it too. She kept her eyes on the surroundings, always alert. They're out there, she said one evening as they sat by the fire. Talon's men. They're getting ready to make their move. Colton stared into the fire, trying to steady his breathing. What do we do? Kara turned to him, her expression hard. We wait, and when they come, we show them what New Texas is made of. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the ranch. Colton stood at the edge of his land, looking out over the fields that stretched for miles. The wind had died down, but there was still a heaviness in the air. It wasn't the storm that worried him. It was the bandits, Commander Talon and his men, who were closing in. Kara stood beside him, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the land. They had spent the past few days preparing, setting traps, and strengthening the defenses around the ranch. But as the hours passed, Colton felt the weight of the situation press down on him more and more. They'll come tonight, Kara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension in her eyes that made Colton's stomach tighten. How do you know? Colton asked, though deep down he knew she was right. He could feel it too, the stillness that meant something was about to break. I've seen their patterns before. Talon's men like to attack at night. They think it gives them the advantage, but they don't know this land like I do. Kara turned to face Colton, her eyes meeting his with a steady gaze. We'll make them regret thinking they could take us. Colton nodded. There was no backing down now. His ranch was his life, and he wasn't going to let it fall into the hands of anyone, especially not men like Talon. They spent the next few hours checking their defenses one last time. Colton made sure the cattle were safely locked in the barn, away from the impending chaos. Kara set up lookout points in the hills, making sure they could see any movement coming from a distance. Everything was in place. As the first stars began to appear in the sky, the wind picked up again, rustling through the tall grass. Colton and Kara sat on the porch, waiting in silence, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The wait was the hardest part, the uncertainty making every second feel like an eternity. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, Colton heard it, a faint sound in the distance. It was too soft to be the wind, too steady to be an animal. He looked at Kara, who had already risen to her feet, her eyes narrowing as she listened. They're here, she said, her voice a whisper. Without a word, they moved into position. Colton took his place by the barn, crouched behind a stack of hay bales, his revolver ready in his hand. Kara disappeared into the shadows, moving with the quiet precision of someone who had spent years on the run. Colton's heart beat loudly in his chest as the minutes ticked by. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. He heard the crunch of footsteps on dry earth, faint voices whispering in the distance. They were getting closer. Kara had warned him about Talon's men. They didn't fight fair. They were ruthless, using any advantage they could get. But Colton wasn't about to let them take him by surprise. He had the high ground, the advantage of knowing this land better than anyone. It was time to use it. Suddenly, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the dark sky. They moved quickly, taking cover behind rocks and trees, but they didn't realize They were walking right into Colton's trap. "Now!" Kara shouted, and in an instant the world erupted into chaos. The bandits hadn't seen the traps that Kara had set, cables that pulled tight, setting off loud alarms that rang through the night air. Colton took his shot, his revolver roaring as the first bandit went down. He quickly ducked behind the hay bales, reloading his weapon as he kept an eye on the advancing men. "Stay low!" Kara called from the ridge above. Colton could just make out her silhouette, moving with deadly grace as she took out another bandit from a distance. Her rifle cracked, and another figure fell, clutching his chest before collapsing into the dust. Colton's heart raced as he scanned the battlefield. The bandits were starting to regroup, pulling back to regroup. He knew it wouldn't take long for them to realize they were outgunned. That's when Talon would make his move. And sure enough, Colton saw him. A tall figure with a dark coat, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who had been in countless battles, his eyes scanning the area as if he could see every move before it happened. "Talon," Kara muttered under her breath. Colton asked, his grip tightening on his revolver. "Almost," she said. "We need to draw him in. Keep him focused on us." Colton didn't hesitate. He stood up from his hiding place and fired a shot in Talon's direction, deliberately missing. The bandits turned their attention toward him, their guns trained on his position. Talon took a step forward, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You think you can stop me, cowboy?" Talon called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield. Colton's heart pounded in his chest, but he held his ground. "You came to the wrong ranch." Suddenly, a loud explosion rang out behind Colton. He turned just in time to see Kara launching a series of explosive charges that lit up the night sky. The bandits were thrown off balance, their positions exposed. Colton took the opportunity to charge, his revolver firing with deadly precision. One by one, the bandits fell, but Talon remained elusive, always staying one step ahead. "Not bad," Talon shouted, his voice filled with admiration. "But you're not ready for this." Talon's men began to fall back, and Colton knew the final battle was about to begin. The leader of the bandits was all that remained. Kara appeared beside him, her rifle aimed directly at Talon. "End of the line," Kara said coldly. Talon smirked, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You think you can kill me? I've taken down whole armies. I don't need to kill you," Kara replied. "I just need to make sure you don't get away." With a single shot, Kara took out the leader's rifle, disarming him. Colton stepped forward, his revolver still trained on Talon. The bandit leader's bravado melted away, replaced by a look of frustration. "It's over, Talon," Colton said, his voice firm. "You won't hurt anyone else." Talon's eyes flickered, and for a moment he seemed almost human again. Then, without warning, he lunged for his last weapon, a hidden blade strapped to his side, but Colton was faster. The blade never reached its target. Colton shot first, the bullet finding its mark. Talon fell to the ground, his body going still as the last breath left his lungs. Kara lowered her rifle, her face unreadable. Colton watched her, unsure of what to say. They had won, but there was a heaviness in the air. "We did it," Colton said quietly. Kara nodded, but her eyes remained distant. "This is just one battle. There's always more." Colton knew she was right. The warlords who controlled New Texas wouldn't stop. But for tonight, the ranch was safe. And he had someone by his side who understood the price of survival. The dust settled, the battle over. But the road ahead was long, and Colton knew that with Kara by his side they could face whatever came next. The sun rose slowly over the plains, casting a golden light over the battered ranch. Colton stood on the porch, staring out at the horizon, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. It had been a long night, full of gunfire, explosions, and the kind of chaos he had only heard about in stories. But now, as the dust settled, the silence that followed was almost deafening. Kara appeared beside him, her face marked by the same tired resolve that had been there the night before. She wasn't one to show much emotion, but Colton could see it in the way she held herself. She was a fighter, no doubt, but there was something about her that made him feel like she was carrying a burden, one she wasn't sure she could put down. They had won. The bandits were gone, and Commander Talon, the leader of the ruthless group, was dead. But the victory felt hollow. New Texas was safe, for now, but the scars of the battle would linger. Colton wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that things would never be the same. "You're quiet," Kara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, almost too soft, considering everything that had happened. Colton turned to her. "Just thinking," he said, trying to shake off the unease. It's over, right? No more bandits? Kara hesitated before answering. It's over for now. But you're right about one thing. Things aren't going to be the same. Talon may be gone, but there are others out there. Others who want control of this land. Colton nodded slowly, taking in her words. He had known the risks of living on the frontier. But this had been different. These weren't just random thieves looking to steal cattle. This was organized, calculated, and driven by something bigger. Whoever was behind Talon and his men wasn't going to give up so easily. Then we'll keep fighting, Colton said, his voice firm. We'll keep this land ours, no matter what. Kara gave him a small smile, but it was tinged with something darker, something Colton couldn't quite place. You've got spirit, cowboy, she said. But it's not just about fighting. It's about surviving. Colton frowned, unsure of what she meant. What do you mean? Kara's eyes turned distant, like she was looking beyond the horizon, beyond the ranch. The fight's not over, and it won't be, not for any of us. There are too many forces out there. Too many people who think they can take what's ours. Colton wasn't sure what to say. He had always fought for what he believed in, but Kara's words made him question whether that was enough. Was it enough to simply protect his land, his cattle, and his way of life? Or would it take more than that to truly secure his future? They stood in silence for a few more minutes before Colton spoke again. Are you going to leave? He asked, his voice quieter this time. Kara turned to him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Colton thought she might just walk away, like so many others had before her. But instead, she shook her head. I'm not sure, she said. I've been running for so long, Colton. Running from the past, from everything that's happened. But maybe I'm tired of running. She paused, letting the words settle between them. This place, your ranch, it's different. There's something about it. Colton looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. She had been through so much, and he could see that she was still holding on to something, a piece of herself that she wasn't ready to let go of. He had never been one for deep conversations, but in that moment, he knew that she needed to hear something. You don't have to run anymore, Colton said, his voice steady. This land's yours if you want it. You've earned it, just like I have. Kara's eyes softened, and for the first time since he had met her, Colton saw a glimpse of vulnerability. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at him like she was weighing his words. I don't know what the future holds, she said at last, but maybe I'm ready to stay. Maybe I'm ready to fight for something again. Colton didn't know if that meant she was staying for good, but he could see that it was a step in the right direction. Whatever had driven her to this point, whatever had kept her running for so long, she was beginning to find a place to stop, and that, to Colton, was enough. I'm not going anywhere, he said, looking out at the fields, and I hope you're not either. They stood together for a while longer, side by side, each of them lost in their thoughts. The ranch was still, the danger had passed, but there was still work to be done. There were always more cattle to herd, more land to tend to. Life on New Texas was hard, but it was a life worth fighting for. The next few weeks were a blur of recovery and rebuilding. Colton and Kara worked together, making sure the ranch was in shape again after the battle. They repaired the barn, fixed the fences, and even began to round up more cattle. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. For the first time in a long time, Colton felt like he wasn't alone in this fight. He had someone by his side who understood what it meant to survive and to protect what mattered. And then, one evening, as they sat around the fire, Kara finally spoke the words that Colton had been waiting to hear. I think I'm ready, she said, her voice quieter than usual. I'm ready to make this my home. No more running. Colton smiled, his heart lifting at her words. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something to hold on to. They didn't have to face the challenges ahead alone. Together they could face whatever came their way. Then welcome home, Colton said softly, and Kara smiled back, the weight of her past still heavy, but her eyes filled with something new, hope.